Hello. It is August 30th. This is devlog number 10 for Project Blue. It has been some time. Done a handful of small things and one thing that I'm pretty proud of that I'd say is like relatively big. So I look forward to showing that here. Scroll through my notes and I'll just kind of go in chronological order. Fair bit of fixing up just some bugs that I don't really think are worth actually treading over directly, especially because some of it is like stuff that got first implemented post the last devlog, so it's not really worth digging into those things specifically. Actually, let's boot it up. First thing that you'll probably notice that has changed is this blurb of green text in the top middle of the screen. This is a widget. It's my first widget. Basically, it's just pulling out a bunch of values surrounding the player character, BP Manny in this case, and printing it on the screen in real time. This is pretty much solely for debugging currently, but I mean, you could easily imagine something like this might be used in like a training mode. But yeah, it's been like so valuable. I mean, so I think most of it is like pretty self-explanatory looking at it. State has been slightly tweaked since the last video. There's no longer an idle state, there is now a grounded state, and there is an airborne state. And I think everything else is the same, but I'm pointing those two out because they kind of represent a slight shift in my thinking about how state exists. Basically, at any given time, there is an active animation or there is a passive one. You're always seeing like one or the other. And the way I'm kind of delineating between those two is if it's a montage, if it's something where I push a button and the thing happens and that's kind of like the end of the action, that's an active one. That's a montage on the back end, and so it just plays the one time. And then a passive one is like the idle animation you're seeing right now, or that's occurring while walking forward like here. So those are handled not by montages but by the animation blueprint. That paradigm hasn't really changed, but I've updated the back end so it kind of reflects that a little bit better, you know. It's not idle anymore because it's not just idle, it also includes walking. And same with airborne, you know, I mean, at this moment in time, I'm using the generic airborne fall animation that Manny comes with, at least for when the velocity is either neutral or backwards. There is a new animation though, which is the fall forward animation. So yeah, and you can actually see jump forward as its own state. And if in the case where the velocity or like the inputs for the jump wind up aren't putting them forward, you're just doing a launch and then letting them fall into the passive state. So it has a different animation from when they're falling forward. That's something I'll probably, you know, continue to tweak as far as like my mentality towards that. I sort of think the reason I kind of like having a passive state for being in the air and not just making it all one consecutive montage, because in theory it's like set, right? There's a hard trajectory here. I'm assuming nothing hits me or whatever, I'm going to land at the same amount of time from when I jumped every time. But it's like as soon as if I wanted to add something like an air dash or a double jump or maybe something like a jump cancel out of like an aerial move, something like that, you end up having like a ton of like extraneous cases that you have to now handle, like falling, and I think it's just an easy like kind of cover-all solution to have a falling like passive state that we like relax into. I will say I spent like quite a bit of time on this animation, and I think it came out pretty like mediocre, unfortunately. But it was still fun to do. I really actually do enjoy animating, as much of a like amateur at it as I am. It's interesting. So that was state. Movement mode is something that is out of the box with Unreal. It's a value that is stored on the, what is it called? The character movement component, which is just something, it's like this, just this black box of functionality, black box for me, a functionality for all actors that are characters. It's the thing that kind of handles like taking in movement inputs or applying, I think, like the impulses or forces if you have physics turned on. It's what Unreal kind of gives to you as like the default option for handling everything. I was capturing that because for a little bit I was using movement mode to sort of inform my animation blueprint, but I quickly came to the conclusion that it was unreliable for some of the things I wanted to do. Namely, when characters like jump into each other, you might remember, I think it was in the previous video, like the characters could like stand on one another's heads, and that was, from the movement mode standpoint, was that them going from the falling state to the walking state, and kind of relying on the movement mode in that case was just not tenable because I didn't want them to be standing on the other player's head at all, and I tried to use the movement mode to block it, but it was kind of like a catch-22. I couldn't use the movement mode that way, so I've since fallen back on the state. While talking about state, this isn't something that's been done yet, but it's definitely something that I've came to the unfortunate conclusion of, which is that having the state orchestrator class, having the state orchestrator class was, I already had open, was probably a mistake, I'd say. Having state hang off of a whole separate body from the actual character that is is experiencing the state is just a little bit silly, and what it has done, it has resulted in me having to do stuff like this is in the orchestrator, but it happens in the player character too, where like I want to use the state, which state is also a struct, but I want to use the state as just a like an enum or a string. I have it as an enum currently, but I don't know, I might go back to string. Anyway, I want to just have that word, and so I'm like constantly breaking open this data struct, and it's like this data struct just gets bigger and bigger because like there's a lot of things that can go into a state. And it's very cumbersome. So you can actually see what I've done here. I've done, like, you could say the first step of a migration to pulling state back into the player character. I think in general, pretty much all of this maybe should be pulled into Manny. I have to believe there is some sort of like utility class setup you can do where I'm not spawning an object per se, it's just like a thing in the code that holds functions, and I can just pass it all the references it needs. I want to believe that exists, and if that's the case, then I think a lot of the orchestrators' functionality could live in something like that. So yeah, the goal is to kind of get like state back into Manny or the player, like the fighter character, and then utilities into some sort of utility class. Again, assuming that exists. And you can kind of see, actually, I've like got some notes here now, kind of alluding to what I've actually just been talking about. Disgusting anti-pattern. Yeah, fighter class is another thing I'm looking at, like a parent to Manny. It's probably still a little ways off, but I'm really eager to get into the game design portion. I've been doing a lot of like foundational setup, which has like design kind of like laced into it, but like really it's about just like getting like functionality that I think important for maybe any fighting game, or at least this one. So but down the line, you know, I'd like to have two characters, and right now everything's just in Manny, and Manny is kind of an amorphous blob from an identity standpoint. So I'd love to start getting into the stage where I'm like putting idea to paper and taking paper and making a character out of it. So at some point, I'm gonna have to, similar to how I'm talking about putting state orchestrator stuff into Manny, I'm then going to want to, I mean not then, maybe I'll do this all in the same swoop. I'm going to want to put a lot of Manny's functionality into a generic parent for all of the fighting characters. So, kind of doing this in a weird order, but that's what I'm kind of looking towards in the nearest future. shifts gotta change. If you don't remember, I'm looking at you. If you don't remember, shifts are the way I've kind of applying quick changes in position, I guess. Like if a character has like a dash or they lunge or step forward. Before it was all being handled with a launch character node call. Issue with that though is launch character is actually causing the character to rise up just a bit, even if you don't put any vertical force. And I think this is Unreal's way of kind of getting around that, like potential complications with like friction from the floor. But I didn't like the idea of them being airborne. And this kind of actually ties back into what I was saying before about like movement mode. Like having the movement mode kind of flicker to the falling state was causing some... It wasn't actually causing any issues yet, but I sort of saw it being a potential issue, and it's such a subtle thing that I really didn't want to have to deal with it later, so... applying an airborne shift, which is determined just by whether or not there is any Z vector at all. We're still using a launch. But for doing a grounded shift, we're now doing an offset. So it's kind of, it's not, this is still, I want to say like a, kind of like a work in progress. Only because it is extremely twitchy. And so like, I think the only example that I really have in the game right now is like the punch, this punch. It kind of works because the punch is just like a snap. And so like having them jolt isn't the worst thing. But like, actually, yeah, like here. Oh yeah, by the way, I have the hit stun turned way up. I was messing with it, but that doesn't matter. But like you can see just like here, like it's too snappy. Like the whole game is just jumping whenever this guy's punches. And some of that is something that could really be approached on the camera level. I've been thinking maybe instead of just having the camera always being glued to the like midpoint between the characters, as a general rule, and then it gets a little more complicated when you get next to the wall. Instead of doing that, it's like I should be capturing that point in between them, but then I should have the camera like accelerate and decelerate to meet that point, so it's not snapping around. Like, you know, Manny will still snap, and that might still be jarring, but at least it's not like disorienting. Like if you can imagine like a full screen lariat type move, or like a dash attack, I should say, that has this snapping quality to it, it would be nauseating, honestly. If I turned up the, let's actually do it. Let's just do it for fun. So 65, that's the number to remember. Let's say we jump way more than that. Let's say we jump, what is that, like 5 times as much almost? So now you can already see where this is going, but it's like, this is gonna look terrible. And then that crazy hit stun, which now is like an appropriate amount of hit stun, right? I just turned into a bullet train. Yeah, this is just like, this is crazy. So this is not a good, like, but I should be able to have a punch that goes this far, right? Like that's not, that's not out of the question. There are moves that do that. The issue is there's no travel time. I'm just appearing there, so shifts are definitely something I want to touch up. But for now, I at least got them in a way that they're not like causing the player to quote unquote fly. Set you back. Let's see what else we got. Okay, and so finally the big piece that I alluded to already at the beginning. I got player collisions when it comes to like intersecting airborne to ground working a way that I think is pretty good. And it took a lot of iterations. So I'm gonna like demonstrate it and then talk a little bit about like the behavior itself and then also the implementation. Because I took a lot of notes on that, those two sides in particular. Let me scroll up a little bit. Okay. Let's get this window back open. So, the old behavior, I'm not gonna like undo all the nodes, but you can always go back and look at it. I think think you'll remember, the old behavior was kind of like one of two things. Either the player character who was jumping would kind of like bounce off the head if I didn't have the capsule collision set to allow them to step up onto him. This resulted in some wonky, like one, the bouncing was just kind of irregular and very inconsistent. Two, it also meant that they would sometimes bounce into the foreground or into the background, and then the characters couldn't even interact anymore, which was obviously, that's like game breaking, so no go. The later iteration was just for them to stand on the other person's head, which is like awkward, but at least it didn't like shatter the whole game. But yeah, still not normal. So what do we have now? Now we have, if an airborne character touches the other character, whether they're airborne or not, their velocity will be canceled out so long as they are not past the other character. So, easiest way for me to, like, I guess, point that out is I've got the velocity thing in the widget right now. Right now it's 250, now it's negative 250, now it's 250. That X value, that's the one to pay attention to here. So, if I jump into the player character, I think, yeah, so it's 250 when I'm in the air as well. So that number will drop to 0 provided I hit like the front of the other Manny. Let's look at this. Okay, so I hit 0, which is like not the easiest thing to see because it's obviously gonna hit 0 if I'm not holding an input or whatever, but you can see that it cancels out just a wee bit early. So that happens. The other thing that happens is like the characters kind of get nudged away from each other. It's more obvious on the grounded character, but the airborne one gets pushed as well. Leave anyways. Wait, let's do this. There we go. Yeah, still no hitboxes on that animation. And well, this is like, that was bad because I barely touched in time. Okay, let's see. 0 out. Okay. So in this case, I guess I need to explain the back-end implementation a little bit because that didn't really demonstrate the push my way. What is happening is it's the capsule is how I'm handling like the hard collision, which is like what you see here. When I'm pushing, it's the capsules nudging up against each other. But you might have noticed that there's also a square that's now kind of covering the lower half. That is what I'm calling the push box. And so, perceptive viewers might have noticed too, there's a player collision enabled true value that's in the widget. It's that bottom row. If I jump, it's false. And that's kind of like a little misleading because obviously we're still colliding in some sense. But what it's really talking about is the player capsule. Player capsule, when they jump like this, the collision response for the channel pawn, which is pawn is the type that the capsule itself is disabled, which means the capsules can't touch each other. And so the original iteration, this meant like they would fall through each other, and then as soon as you touch the ground, re-enable the player collision. That meant if they were intersecting at all, they would snap away from each other, and like that was functional, but it was a little jarring too, right? Because it had the same quality where like the camera is snapping now, and so that was like a big crux of what I was trying to fix these past like week and a half, honestly. So now what happens? In addition to that stuff, that does happen. The collision does turn off and then back on when they land. There's now a new box that's covering their lower half. You can see it's got like a thicker line. That is the push box, and that does not have hit collisions, but it does have overlap detection. And so when these two values boxes overlap, that's when we make a check. If the velocity is going to the right, let's say, but the character that's airborne is on the left side, we cancel out velocity. We don't want them to like merge any deeper than they have to. And then they push apart because in theory, like, they will wedge themselves into one another. Like, even though the velocity gets turned off, they're going to be a little bit overlapped. So that's what causes the nudge. Unfortunately, that means that I don't think I can really show it in slow-mo because it's not something that's... Because I think velocity... How do I say it? I think because we're running the game at a slower speed now, things like the boxes colliding, like they should here. are happening at a quote-unquote faster rate compared to the fall speed, and so you don't really see the overlap as intently as you do in real time, or like normal speed, I should say. And boom, push apart. There you go. Okay, so actually, yeah, you can kind of see that. Yeah, I guess, no, never mind. Now that I'm thinking about it, doesn't make sense. The box is only, I made the box only up to waist high because I didn't want the pushing to occur so early on. I think it looks smoother when you only start to slide off. In my opinion, it looks a little bit smoother when you only start to slide off partway down the body, whereas landing, like doing it way up here, makes it really awkward to jump over them. It's like you're getting caught in their head like a little too often. So I kind of just jumped back and forth between behavior and implementation. Let me see if there's anything else with the behavior I wanted to point out. Oh yeah, it's time. Okay, if you cross over the character, you'll still have them push away, but the velocity doesn't turn off until you land. And I think it made sense because if someone landed on you, it'll push you. You'll push to the side, but like kind of in the way the game mechanics work, that makes sense for you to kind of squeeze out from under them, regardless of the side they're on. But your velocity shouldn't be canceled out because they're not in your way. You know, they're behind you as you touch. So that felt kind of organic. And let's see. The other quality that was kind of tricky was like how this interacts with the corner. So yeah, I guess there's no way to really talk about like there's kind of like two steps to this solution. Mainly that out of the box, it's actually worked pretty well. Like just like the implementation for this setting, but it did require a tune-up, and so sorry, I should just talk about what the behavior is and what I wanted. The behavior here is if the player character, like one player character, is up against the wall, you should never be able to just steal a corner by jumping into them. And so you can see that is happening now. There's the that print to the log that's kind of spoiling the fix change I had. But even without that fix change, without that adjustment to like really protect it, it actually didn't happen very often anyway. But there was weird fringe cases where you could steal the corner. If I just jumped into the wall like 30 times, one of those times the character jumping might actually squeeze in and steal it. And I think that simply comes down to the fact that hit collisions in Unreal are not super deterministic, like where they'll stop you at. So if I reboot this, like pay attention to my X location now. That's the fourth line for the X value. As I back into the wall, we get 80.210. So that's where it's stopping me, right? It detects I'm holding left. That detects me, and it just holds me there. If I do it again, I think as long as I'm just walking, it'll always be the same value. So it's kind of deterministic, right? You can tell it to my velocity. Now, where you see the discrepancy is if I jump, because that messes. Actually, it says here. Oh yeah, no. Jump backwards is a different speed. Okay, that's right. So you can see like I'm getting now a slight fluctuation in the location. So I'm getting 80.178, 80.210, 80.168. Basically, it kind of comes down to the fact of like different speeds, and especially when they're applied from like different like distances, can result in the collision occurring at a slightly different location. I don't think it's such a big deal that I need to worry about it in like the practical cases of like how it affects the combo. But it was a concern when it comes to how do I determine if my character is more left than the other character, which is kind of like how I'm, you know, how would you steal the corner, right? It's like the corner should belong to whoever's leftmost. But if me walking back into the corner only puts me at 80.210, and a player character could in theory jump and get like that extra, what is that, like 0.05-ish towards the wall. Now it's like they can steal the corner because of that quality, that like the undeterministic behavior that I was talking about. So the fix for that to happen again, it didn't happen often, but let's say 1 in 30, you could just like steal the corner if you jumped from the right distance away, or the other player character got nudged into the wall the right way. I'm not sure which was really varying there. The fix for that, actually, and before I even talk about the fix, let's just demonstrate, like, if you're not against the corner, then the push mechanics actually kind of work pretty organically. Like the player character. Actually, no. Let's demonstrate one more thing. God, why do I even take notes? I'm just gonna freeball it anyway. Let's see. Where's the function I want? It's the handle collision. I'm not Manny. That's fine. Okay. So handle player collision. Oh no, actually, so the way that's actually, this is actually, well, handle player collision is not the, yeah, this should probably be renamed. This is not even like, this is only like when you're moving along the ground. So this is actually the behavior that's talking about with the push, that box that covers the lower body. It's called the push box. We do a check to see should halt air velocity, and that's just doing all the logic for where we compare their locations, and we get the velocity of the character that's jumping or moving. And we're like, okay, clearly you're jumping into the other player. We need to stop the velocity. That's just that. Then what we're doing is we're setting an overlap offset. And this is how the characters push apart from one another. It's just a value that actually, it's like a variable, and it gets set on the Manny, and it's actually being set on both Mannies. At least in theory. And that is getting handled by the event tick. And so that is where we've got some of this stuff. So I wanted to show off, we're using a line trace. So the default behavior, without like doing this extra check, is that you would actually, if you didn't steal the corner, you would actually push the other player character, the one that's grounded still, into the corner because they were getting pushed apart by default. What we're instead doing here is we're using a line trace that's looking for the wall. Yeah, actually, so if I you can see how I was doing this from a debug standpoint. There's now a print message that'll basically tell us if I jump into Manny, it just behaves fine. But as soon as I get him up against the wall, you see the purple messages going to collide with stationary wall boundary. So that's the check. We can, instead of doing the print statement though, because those are kind of ugly, I think we can just turn this line trace. Now you should see actually like the red lines that are being used to check. I don't know why, but they only seem to show up for the Manny I'm controlling most of the time. There's probably some setting about maybe like a character has to exist. But I mean, you could just know that like, you can see like they kind of slope like with my Manny, like off to his back. The same thing is happening with the other Manny, you just don't see it very well. Or at all. I don't know. There's like a green line you can see by the other Manny's waist. Maybe that's it. I actually don't know. But either way, the check's going on. It sees the wall behind it. And so because the wall, because we're seeing that there is a collision with the wall, we just kind of snuff out the execution. But if there's not, then we have the offset. So that's a check going on to make sure they don't get eaten into the wall, basically. So that is the case. That is how we handle the case where you try to jump into them and there's no weird shenanigans with stealing a corner. We had to also make sure that you just didn't push them into the wall endlessly. If they're close to the wall, but not like all the way up against it, then despite it being like a very thin amount of space, just the natural way the push works, because my Manny will get on the other side of their Manny, right? And so the offset, is that what I call it, the offset? The overlap offset will account for the fact that I'm already up against the wall, and it won't push me, but it will push the other Manny out. So you can see here, boom, I've got the corner now. And I think that's how I see it in most fighting games. You kind of, being in the corner is kind of a bad deal, but there's also like an element of risk that as soon as you step out, the other character has the option to steal it from you and then kind of cross you up or catch you off guard. So anyway, lastly, this is the part I started with, and it really should have been the last point. You can kind of see, actually, there's a little, like, a line that kind of pops up next to the boundary on the left side. It's like right by my character's right shoulder. This is the, what do I call it? Like the protection box or something? corner protection box. So what this is doing now is it all exists for what it's worth. Like the line popping up is me just adding some visibility because I think it makes it more legible. Like you can see more easily what's happening. But what's happening is anytime one of the player characters overlap with it, they get kind of saved as an overlapping actor to the wall. And how did I just do this? So yeah, added as an actor, cast to Manny. Good suck. Yeah, wait, how did I do this? Okay, that's right. So we do a check whenever there's like a new overlap, right, with one of the player characters. And basically what we're saying is if there's actually already an overlapping actor, which by default should only ever be the two player characters, if there is an overlap, then we're going to add another offset. This one being called the corner protection offset, so it works very similarly to the other one. There's the handle overlap offset. This is the handle corner protection offset. It's actually simpler though, because we don't need to worry about the other Manny getting pushed into a wall, since this is only going to occur going away from the wall, basically. But we set another variable on Manny similarly that's running on the event tick, but only if it's already occupied. I do think there's an edge case here, which I can't really demonstrate without having control of both characters simultaneously. But I believe there would be a weird circumstance where, let's say player A, let's say the opponent Manny, which we'll say is Manny A for this use case, is occupying the wall. If I jump up into them, and you can kind of actually see this now that I've like pointed out, you can kind of tell that there's like some like horizontal fighting going on. I can kind of get in, but the wall keeps me from ever being able to totally get wedged into that corner. But anyway, because I'm jumping up here and being kind of blocked, if the other Manny were to walk out to the right, I would actually still get pushed out because we're only unsetting the corner protection offset when end overlap has occurred. So I think there's an edge case here that needs to be handled that I just haven't touched yet, but if the second Manny to like touch this overlapping protection area is the only Manny, like the first Manny leaves, they should become like the quote-unquote rightful owner of the wall. So just kind of calling out something that I'll want to touch up at some point. Last things, I guess, worth calling out. That was the really big thing, the player collision. I'm so happy how this turned out. This took me so much effort and time to like really get working. I tried doing stuff like using the offset push, but doing it like on the capsule. I tried like changing like capsule size. I was trying to have like various like boxes to like preemptively see that we're gonna collide and doing logic that way. You know, I forget if I just said it, like timelines. Trying to use timelines to like organically shift them into position. That's like the hardest, like one of the hardest parts I'd say, is like trying to make movement smooth and not just this snappy jerky thing, which was happening with the original collision, or if you like turn collision off and then turn it back on. So yeah, last thing I'll call out, you might have already seen it, I think I've inadvertently demoed it a lot, but player characters don't always switch sides. It used to be that if I jumped over, the jumping character would turn around midair and it looks jarring, and it's also not how a lot of fighting games work. You want the character usually to kind of stay facing the same way because it sort of has commitment, like kind of tied into jumping over. You can do like still cross-ups and stuff, and in fact some aerials could be better because they might reach behind you, which means they're particularly good for cross-up scenarios, but making it so that you're always facing forward while the grounded opponent, provided they're not doing like a punch themselves, are snapping immediately means that they have like the opportunity to now like pursue you or punch you on landing. So yeah, that was a quick little one, but I think it's really nice. Also, blend times, I reduced those for most animation blueprints, so it makes everything a little snappier. I don't know that that's like a good thing per se, like it looks really weird when I snap like that. But on the flip side, it also looked weird when I would land in this animation and like they'd swivel around, but their foot would still be out because they were like doing a blend between the falling and the landing. So I think this really just speaks to the fact that maybe I need like a landing animation that can kind of smooth the blend a little bit between the two states, but I don't know. If the animation looked off, that's probably what you were seeing, honestly, because it looked kind of weird. And that wraps it up. You know, as always, thank you to any who might be watching this at whatever point in time, I don't know. And have a good day.